So give us the background. She's talking about RealPage.
She is talking about the practice of people. You are a landlord or apartment owner, or you're just a or you're property management, whatever. You want to
give
know
us the RealPage background.
You want to know how to set your rents for your property. You buy RealPage. RealPage is a service, a software service that will give you suggestions on how to set your rent.
Well, RealPage is a company that owns a lot of different property technology systems, in property management software, and it's like basically accounting software to manage how you rent your properties. It's a full suite of kind of property management systems, and they offer other suites. RealPage has gone out and bought a lot of different companies over the years, and they've bought several companies that work on pricing intelligence and using information, whether either through their own their data from their property management systems. So their systems are managing properties all over the country, and they're taking that data and they're saying, okay, in your market of Little Rock, Arkansas, we know that the rents for similar properties are going, kind of in this range, and we know the occupancy is kind of in this range, and we know from your availability of units, you have a lot of units available or you have no units available. Based on those factors, we suggest that you price your apartments, this 2-bedroom apartment, in this range. No, it doesn't do it for you automatically. It's a suggestion. You can decline it. You can accept it. It will suggest prices going up. It suggests price going down as well. And it's not too dissimilar to other technologies in other industries, basically using competitors' pricing information to inform your own pricing decisions. It's not that RealPage says the rents in Little Rock, Arkansas will be $2,000 this month for all 2 bedrooms.
Yeah.
And it gives the same recommendation to everybody. That's not what happens.
Yeah. No, that's true. I think, just for, not like devil's advocate, but it is, I think the collusion angle of this is this idea that there are multiple apartment owners that are being coordinated by RealPage software to set their rents at a specific. So ideally, the argument goes, these landlords should be competing against each other, and again, in this collusion view, instead, RealPage is making them work together, and in a way that, if I owned all the apples, if me and Greg across the street all owned all the apples in the city, we got together, instead of competing, we just said we're going to set it for $90 or whatever. And that's what they're saying. The handshake agreement is actually happens when you're using the RealPage software.
Without ever actually, meeting your competitor, know that you're colluding. You're just all. The idea is it's collusion through a third party. And the third party is facilitating the collusion on a one-by-one basis. But again, the difference is there is no agreement for everyone to do the same thing.
Yeah.
When I think of collusion, it's like, hey, we're all going to do this. Got it? Okay, everybody does it, and whoever doesn't, if somebody doesn't do it, you kind of mess up the whole collusion ring, and you can undercut pricing. And there's a couple articles. So often this story gets framed in a context of price fixing and collusion, and then they try to take the reality and fit it into that narrative.
Yeah.
When the reality is different from what you would think of as price gouging or price fixing or collusion, because it isn't those things. Just a quick example. Like there's this Atlantic article, AI entitled "We're Entering an AI Price Fixing Dystopia" by Roger Karma. And in this piece, it's so apparent that they, without understanding exactly what RealPage is or what it does or how many people actually use it, they have their conclusions already made.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many times I've heard recently of people saying it's like, RealPage has like absolute market dominance and everyone's on RealPage and everybody's using. Even the title of this piece or in the kind of the second line, like they say like, there's a quote in a speech from the Federal Trade Commission Chair Maureen Olesen. he basically says, is it okay for a guy named Bob to collect confidential price strategy information from all the participants in a market and then tell everybody how they should price? She asked. If it isn't okay for a guy named Bob to do it, then it isn't okay for an algorithm to do it. The idea that you can't go and figure out what your competitors are charging is asinine.
Well, again, like I think that a lot of this hinges.
It's not confidential price information.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and
it's on the internet,
and that's a good point. So for some of these arguments, it hinges on, is this public or private information, and I think a lot of this has to do with how kind of not coercive or how much you really are forced to obey, the quote unquote cartel.
That's the other piece. I'm glad you brought that up, Matt, because later on in this article, you can tell I'm just a little bit fired up because it's just so many lies.
Yeah.
And they said basically that's like one ex-employee, a former employee, and former employees. No one's quoted, no one's named. It's just former employees.
You don't want to get outed.
Have said that failure to comply with the company's recommendations could result in clients being kicked off the service.
To me, this is the biggest giveaway, says an antitrust lawyer.
So they're taking former employees, unnamed former employees that have hearsay about maybe what's happened with one client in the past as the biggest giveaway.
Yeah.
It makes no sense. Tell me why, as any profit-seeking company, if you're selling, you have a product that you're selling to a client. It's a SaaS product, software as a service, and they're not using it. You're going to kick them off for not using it, and they're paying their subscription?
Yeah, well, now there are, so I think that it does get into this idea of how much RealPage, because there's ways to influence them to use the service without kicking them off. There are ways to like kind of punish,
nudge,
and I think a lot of this it may hinge on how forceful RealPage is with the compliance on, and it may shake out that maybe RealPage isn't banned, but they have to throw up a bunch of warnings and like, remember, you're free to make your own decisions and you will not be penalized for going off our recommendation. That's one option. I do think that there's also two tracks. I'm not sure if we spoke about this before the Gray Report or not. There is a legislative track, and then there's a courts track. Yeah. And what they're trying to do in the courts is they're trying to fit this into traditional ideas of collusion and antitrust, and and they're kind of trying to establish that these landlords are an illegal are colluding again.
So yeah. Matt, let's say that this is a problem, I think there's no evidence to support that it is. But tell us about some of the proposed solutions, to some of the legislation or some of the actions that the court has been taking. And I know that the federal government, the FBI has been going, or FTC has been going after RealPage.
Yeah, so
Justice Department. Sorry,
that case is because this is just like an investigation. I wasn't really able to figure out like what are they really going to hang their hat on in their argument. I do know that like that is a track that
they got. You mean it's going to get dropped after the election?
Who knows? All I know is that it is not. They're not in court yet. The trial hasn't started yet. You don't know what the arguments are going to be, but there is an investigation, and yeah,
Good thing our justice system is very nonpartisan.
I tend to believe.
Motivated.
Yeah. Like I just have a little bit more data on and more specifics on what this legislative path could look like because of not only the Biden-Harris communications, but there's a couple of laws passed in California that could act as a model of what this price fixing could be. So,
tell us about what they've done in California or they're trying to do.
So one of them is a recently passed bill, actually passed by San Francisco, which is
like a ordinance, for the city.
It's a city ordinance that bans price fixing based on the sharing of non-public data. So that's why I meant maybe in order to do business in San Francisco, they have to make their data public to everyone or something, and just keep their algorithm private. That's one thing. Another example in California is Prop 33, which basically it's very simple. It just means it is a proposition that's like we can do rent control now. And that's it. That's like I read the full text. The full text
We can just control the rents.
was
We can
all of
just-
the
we can
bans
just
on
fix the
rent.
rents.
All the bans on rent control were crossed out. Like that's our
Yeah.
our proposal. Like look at what we crossed out.
So
That's
when
it.
we're talking about, so like what it, at me as a firm, so like, okay, great capital, people can see the offices back here. So like if I have somebody, if we have somebody in the office that calls our competitors and says, you know, what are you charging for a 2-bedroom apartment?
Yeah.
What are you charging for a 1-bedroom apartment? And then we just call every competitors and we ask them, they tell us.
Yeah.
Because they probably will. And then I use that information to say, okay, well,
Well, there is already services.
Can I not do that? Is
there's
there a saying I can't
you
do
can
that?
You can go to apartments.com and you can figure out that too. I do. So that.
No, but in my what I'm asking you is, so like, okay, maybe apartments.com exists, but I've obtained the information from just old fashioned. I've called in,
I agree,
I've
yeah,
walked
yeah,
into the
yeah.
apartment, and I've asked them, and they have voluntarily supplied that information.
So
to me.
in the courtroom,
now,
I guess
I can't take that information. Put it on my computer and
I think
say
you could.
equals average. What is the average rent?
Yeah, I think you could because then
Like,
they would
well,
say
I know I can't today,
I
but-
think that, but you can't exactly ask how many are empty. I wonder if like vacancy information.
So what if I walked in and they told me because they all like, hey, what's your occupancy?
Yeah, then you're in the courtroom. The argument would be, yeah, like how.
So that
yeah,
is
It's-
doing
it's-
that. That's
again,
being proposed as
I am not a
that's,
lawyer
they're
and
saying that
not
that's
even
going to
close to
be,
a lawyer.
but they're saying that would be illegal because it's proprietary information.
Yes.
I only have that information because I went out and got it. It's mine. I didn't post it anywhere. And then I've taken that and I've opened up an Excel sheet and I've used a simple form because in some of the legislation we've seen, it says anytime you use any sort of algorithm or computation.
So it's good that you mentioned that because the two in the rent control is allowed. You can if you want to. That's the one, and then those California ones are actually less powerful than this one. That's actually a national level.
Is this the Senate bill?
Yes, the Senate bill
Okay, let's
that
pull
was
that up.
proposed by a senator from Vermont, and then and there was another senator, and we have it up here too. Okay,
Matt really likes the font that the Senate
I know it
uses.
just looks like kind of like the Old West, and I didn't know that this is how bills look. And congrats, it just looks nice, good visual. But the actual text is a little, I don't know, maybe.
Anyway, so let's get into the details.
Yeah.
The act may be cited as preventing algorithmic facilitation of rental housing cartels Act of 2024. Jeez,
Okay, so
sounds bad.
specifically now in the press release of the bill, they talk about how it will make it unlawful for rental property owners to contract for the services of a company that coordinates rental prices and supply information. And the way they describe it here, it's really fairly short. We're talking like we're talking like 9 pages, and half of them is definitions. This is the good stuff here. They define prohibited acts, which include any software or company or software that takes rental data from more than 2 apartment owners, uses computation to process that data, and suggests rent prices based on that computation.
So the story that I just told of me going
Yeah.
out and calling or physically going in, hey, what are your 2 bedrooms running for? Hey, curious, how occupied are you all? Do you have good availability right now? And I do that I go to 3 properties in a day because that's easy. That's very easy
Yeah.
to do. And I get that information and I go home and I've got that written down in my notebook. And then I take that and I put it in a blank Excel worksheet, and I just put the rent numbers in, and I've got occupancy, and I just average it out.
Yeah.
And I use that information that I've obtained to give me the idea of where I should set my rent prices.
I think
that's illegal.
Yeah, well, I think.
But that's what they're proposing.
Yeah, pretty much.
How the hell am you supposed to price your rentals?
Well, and that's, I think it's worded that broadly to avoid loopholes, but it makes me think about if this law had even more breadth, which makes me think about this Atlantic and how hard it would just be to do that. So as broad as it is, it makes you think, well, that's almost unenforceable. There's a lot of people doing this. There's a lot of people, using computation, getting information, and so it describes acts that are a lot more common than you think. Algorithms are around more, and they've been shaping a lot of the economy. In that Atlantic piece, the thing that I thought was interesting was how they say we're entering price fixing utopia. They don't really have a specific solution for it that they advocate for, because it's like it's this acknowledgement that it's in lumber prices, it's in food prices, and grain prices, and steel prices. And they use an example of
It's how
gas
the whole
station prices, which I think is fascinating though.
prices are information. They're data for demand, for supply, for demand, and they can give you indications of supply. Without pricing information, we can't make educated decisions on what we should do in the economy or how individual actors in the economy should behave, and where we should set our own prices.
It is scary.
That's why the more information, higher frequency information, it gives you. It can be overwhelming at times, but it helps us. It makes for a much more functioning market and a much more efficient market.
Yeah, I do agree, and I also think that
this is anti-science, is what it is.
It's
anti-science.
It's anti-math too, because of
it's
algorithms.
anti-math, it's anti-economics, it's anti-science, and it's anti-common sense.
So, and I also think that it ignores this power of building. You build new apartments, and I think as long as the power of building new apartments to make apartments cheaper is great, remains greater than any power that RealPage could even pretend to have, in the worst view of these people as collusion helpers. I think that's it.
I think that's the biggest travesty of all of this, man, is that this is a distraction from the real solution. We're talking about a Band-Aid that has been, drenched in poison. It's not going to solve the problem. It's going to make the problem worse. It's not going to lead to more transparency. It's going to, if anything, you would have more consolidation because margins would probably drop anymore, and only the biggest companies could afford to get into the business. And so you would just have mega corporations running it because they would have some sort of regulatory capture on the entire thing, and they'd be fine with rent control because they'd just see it as a big bond, and it would just be, it would be Blackstone, and it would be the insurance companies that would own everything. So instead of the solution is only to add more supply. Full stop. More supply. That should be the only thing that's in the conversation. Not that we can't be open to other ideas, but these are bad ideas.
It's true, and they give this example, and I thought it was really interesting too, of these German gas stations that they both had. They were two different companies, and I think they even used two different algorithms to set their gas prices. And what happened was these, whether you call it AI or whatever, these algorithms actually didn't compete with each other. They learned to work with each other, and so that actually improved the profits of these gas stations by a lot. Now, what makes me think is I don't think there's any news in Germany of sky high gas prices. They figured out a way to coexist. I think there's a natural function within the market that would limit prices from going sky high. And it's not turning off the algorithm. It's building more gas stations or pumping more gas or really, frankly, it is building more gas stations because apart from the price of gas, that's what it is. And so there is this function also within the apartment market. It's not turn off the algorithms. It's build more apartments. Anything else is kind of, and that's the reason why rents have not grown this past year. That's the reason why probably Germany is not a dystopia of high gas prices. It's because there is a function within the market, and the algorithm can only do so much. It can't control everything.
There's no science that revenue management or RealPage or any algorithm has dramatically increased rent across the nation. Has it contributed to more steady rent increases over time? Perhaps maybe it had smoothed some things out a little bit. Again, maybe only 7% of the rental stock is even on RealPage, and then just because you're on RealPage doesn't mean you're on revenue management. That's a whole other thing.
So I would say, as a counterexample, if it was a market or product, whether it's steel or whatever, where it was a finite resource, where you couldn't build more, then that collusion angle, then if everyone's in lockstep, then that starts to make a whole lot of sense. But that's not where we are right now.
Through your research, Matt, is that's all happening in the steel industry. That there is algorithms that help price what steel should be bought and sold for. Sure, it is a commodity. Housing, it can be viewed as a commodity.
But steel is not a limited resource, nor is, for instance, grain trading algorithms, or these are things where
housing is different.
Where if it gets expensive, if the evil colluders make things expensive, what happens is more people come into. Now this is again, the theory is more people will come into that market and make it cheaper because they want that money and.
Exactly. There's a couple points of where the arguments for saying that this algorithm, a RealPage, is destroying the rental market or the economy. It flies in the face of people have to afford these rental rates at some point. It has to be
Yeah.
in the realm of affordability. Now, could you say, is it pushing to the edge of affordability? I think that was happening well before these algorithms were being, kind of used.
Yeah.
It's been going on for, for years, many decades.
Yeah.
It's maybe more in the last decade or so, as, more people have been fixing up older apartments and raising the rents.
No, I still think that it does boil down to supply. Like you said, it's really the only thing that makes sense. The power of greater supply to lower prices is a dominant force here, and it's going. And I think that because of the pervasiveness of algorithms, it's going to be really hard to fight their use, and it threads itself through a lot of ways that property management happens in an apartment, and and I'm not trying to welcome the dystopia. I'm just trying to say, like, it's already happening, and like there is a way out. It's by building more apartments.
Yeah.